All right, it's time to get started with today's webinar. Well, welcome to everybody from wherever you are joining us, and good afternoon from Jyväskylä, Finland. Good morning if you are in some other time zone, and welcome to today's session, How to Improve Employee Well-being in the Hybrid Working World. I'm Tiina Hoffman from Firstbeat. I'm an exercise physiologist and master trainer here, and I'll be hosting the session. And shortly, I'll be joined here by Andrew Magill from Vitality, Tim Wright, my colleague from Firstbeat, and Steve Moore from Hymans, Robertson. And we're going to be having a good discussion with this group. They're all joining me from the UK today. We have a really interesting and topical 45-minute session ahead, demonstrated by the large number of registrants we have today. Well, almost 400 people have signed up for the webinar. The pandemic sure has changed the work landscape and tested all of our resilience, both companies and employees. And of course, hybrid work or remote work in itself, it's not a new thing or new concept. Many of us have been doing some form of it already well before the pandemic. But as a result of the pandemic, it has gotten a lot more common and will be a lot more common going forward and widespread. And now it's time for all of us, companies and employees and people working with this, to find ways to react and adjust and find the best practices and strategies so that people can maintain good mental health and physical health and also good performance and good efficiency with their work. A couple of practical matters before we go forward. So all of your mics are on mute during the webinar, but you can write questions in the Q&A box and we'll pick them from there. And we'll also be answering your questions that you have sent ahead of time. And then also the webinar is recorded and you'll get a chance to access that afterwards via our website. Here is our agenda today. So after this quick introduction, I'll introduce Andrew Magill from Vitality, and he's going to share some interesting numbers and data from a report that they did on hybrid working and healthy hybrid working specifically. After that, I'll share some findings and experiences from our own Firstbeat data, what kind of insights and challenges the data has raised, and we'll sort of tie that together in our roundtable discussion. And at that point, I'll welcome Tim Wright and Steve Moore to join us in, and we'll be discussing and answering your questions and hopefully having a good discussion on this topic in general. But now I'm going to hand the screen over to Andrew Magill. And I'll introduce him before that, but he's going to give us some interesting background and findings on this topic. Previously, Andy worked as a physiotherapist in Scotland, Australia, and also New Zealand. And after leaving clinical practice, he joined Vitality, where he now works as a head Vitality coach. Vitality is a financial services company that offers, for example, health, life, and investment insurance products to its members. And Andy and his team's job is to engage people and educate them and inspire them to make healthier and positive changes in their lifestyles and in their health behaviors. So great to have you as our guest today, Andy. Welcome, and I'll turn all of it to you now, and we'll listen to your content.
Thank you very much, Tiina, and thank you very much for that fantastic introduction. You've really set the scene for us today. So what I'll do is I'll just share my screen. Just double check, Tiina, before we get going. Can you see that okay?
Yes, looks great.
Perfect. Thank you very much. As you said, Tiina, the purpose of being here today is very much just to share some insight in relation to a recent study that Vitality released in partnership with the RSA, which we're extremely proud of. I was actually thinking in advance of today that the timing couldn't be better. We chatted around a few ideas a few months ago with regards to what would be a really interesting topic to visit at this time. The report itself was launched in May of this year, and this was very much in relation to sort of the landscape in terms of how we as organizations, be it employers or employees within organizations, can move forwards and create a healthy hybrid working environment as we progressed out of the lockdown restrictions in the UK relating to the COVID-19 pandemic. So really interested in sharing these insights today, but most importantly for everyone watching, I'm really interested to hear your insights, your experiences, because actually at this moment, this is what we're currently living through and this is currently what we're actually executing. So great to be here. And again, thanks again for the opportunity. In terms of just to introduce the report, as I said, we partnered on Vitality. We always partner with best in class. So we partnered with the RSA to look into essentially what impact did the COVID-19 pandemic have on home workers? And we as organizations, what was it that we need to be thinking about as we move forwards to almost get this best of both worlds? Because there are no doubt that there are upsides to working from home, and there are also downsides. And then in terms of thinking about the office environment, certainly there are many, many upsides. But as well as that, we have seen through the volume of time and how we've had to adapt to working from home in terms of seeing that. So in terms of, we're really eager to understand how do we get the best of both. In terms of I suppose, a very high level overview of the key findings, I just want to share 3 of these with you. So these basically relate to the ergonomic time bomb, which is in terms of due to being working from home, what's the impact been on our musculoskeletal system? So this is something that we're very, very key to address and key to ensure we get a handle on. Also around mental health and well-being, a very, very pertinent topic for us at the moment in relation to actually our ability to manage on a day-to-day basis, both in the home environment, but then as we transition back into the work environment as well in the office world. And then also around that, sort of at the time whenever we published this report, there was a big expectation gap in relation to what we potentially as employees would like to work and gain from work, and in terms of doing that versus the actual expectations of our employers, and also in terms of from the employer's perspective, what was it that they needed to do to ensure that business goals are still achieved, but at the same time also keeping health and well-being of their organization forefront for the best of their organization, but as well as the health of the overall group as well. In terms of, it was a pivotal moment, and we're very, very pleased. What I'll do today is very much just dive into some of the key findings of that and the key recommendations of that in relation to the report. Very much looking forward to the conversation as well with my fellow guests to be able to dive into this a little bit further. In terms of the key findings from the report, we essentially broke it down into 5 key areas. So first of all, in relating to, I suppose, sort of risk and risk reporting and accountability, and probably a key thing for this is really around sort of, you can't manage what you don't measure. So in terms of the types of things that we were seeing coming through in the evidence, we saw that there's 20% greater participation in workplace health when the topic is discussed at board level. Now, this is something that I think even pre-COVID is something that through our Britain's Healthiest Workplace evidence, we knew that if health and well-being is on the agenda at board level, then it is something that is discussed, it is something that can be managed against, it is something that policies can be introduced with regards to as well. Coming forwards, this is even more pertinent, and as organizations manage a dispersed workforce, be it within an office environment as well as a home working environment, this is something that is going to be really, really key as we move forwards. In terms of, I've already mentioned around sort of the musculoskeletal system and the ergonomic time bomb, but the fact of the matter is that depending upon your workforce, for example, we find that with the younger workforce who potentially might have been in a house share or alternatively living in smaller accommodation, there was no doubt, and I think we've all seen it and we can all relate to the stories of people perching on kitchen tables or in bedrooms. The ergonomic environment in which they were working was not ideal. In addition to that, on the flip side of it, in terms of, I suppose, at the other end of the continuum, maybe potentially older employees with more space, a larger home, then did have the opportunities to actually work in different ways and actually set themselves up really, really well. So it's just interesting to see that we did see an increase in musculoskeletal pain over the course of the pandemic. And again, relating back to our sort of Britain's Healthiest Workplace evidence, which was released prior to the pandemic, we find that employees across the UK are reporting at least one form of musculoskeletal pain. And as Tiina referred to sort of in my introduction as a physiotherapist, I can certainly relate to this, and I've sort of been on the other side in terms of the treatment of these individuals as well. Relating to sort of musculoskeletal health and physical health, which are so closely intertwined. This is actually something we were discussing just before coming on to the call this afternoon, is around sort of the 45% of remote workers said that they're spending more time at their workstations. Now, ultimately, one of the great gains of working from home has been the fact that there is a less of a commute time in terms of zero commute, which is fantastic. We are, however, seeing with that correspondingly we're spending potentially more time at our workstations and using that additional time rather than to get out and potentially be more active or do something to take our time away from work. We are actually able to get on and do work earlier in the morning, which suits for some. But again, one of the key things that we can all relate to share is that whenever you do sit down earlier in the morning, before you know it, sort of your morning has gone, and then you're in the workstation for a little bit longer. So again, this is just another one of the themes that we saw coming through with the evidence. Mental health, as I said, a key area of focus for a lot of organizations, and let's be honest, us as individuals, because no doubt it has been a stressful year and stressful almost 2 years now at that rate. We did find that 44% of remote workers find it somewhat easier to manage mental health whilst in the workplace, which is a fantastic insight. And I suppose in ways this gives, whenever you are working from home, it gives employees an opportunity to potentially disconnect a little bit quicker, or alternatively manage their expectations and manage their sort of preparation, be it for meetings or alternatively managing day-to-day workplace stress really, really effectively. I know personally, in terms of doing a lot of remote working and delivering even presentations such as this, you can deliver and you can work things differently, which is a fantastic opportunity. But at the same time, we also have to be I suppose cognizant of the opportunities that others do not have in terms of based upon their role and things like that as well. So again, mental health and well-being and the management of is a key thing for us going forwards too. And again, another sort of key trend that was coming through from the Healthy Hybrid report is around sustainability and inclusivity. There's no doubt about it in terms of the main groups, I suppose, that we found that were potentially impacted most through the time in which we've had to work from home are individuals from BAME groups, in addition to female workers, and then finally, as I've already related to, workers that are of a younger age bracket. Now, there are lots and lots of different ways in terms of they've each been impacted, ranging from caring responsibilities, for example, all the way through to lack of access to equipment. So one of the things that we're definitely seeing here is that we have a responsibility, if we're in a position whereby we are responsible for shaping health and wellbeing strategies. We must be sort of really taking into account the needs of our whole workforce, appreciating that there are different generational factors, in addition to thinking about the role and the outcomes that are unique to potentially each individual and the role that they do as well. So again, a lot of information there, but again, ultimately what it comes down to is 10 key recommendations rising from the report that we suggest, and sort of that the evidence suggests that we could consider as we go forwards. And again, I'll just relate into each of the key areas that I've just touched upon. So in relation to risk reporting and accountability, one of the key things that we're seeing here is around feedback. So again, creating healthy hybrid feedback loops, and ultimately every organization is different, but one of the key things that we are seeing is ultimately getting close to your employees. Whilst we may be further apart in terms of our distance and where we are, getting close to employees to understand what their needs are and what they need at that time is really, really key, because ultimately getting the engagement in those health and wellbeing strategies is brilliant. You can have the most fantastic offering in the world, and many organizations strive to achieve this, but ultimately without the engagement from the ground up from your employees, it'll be very, very difficult to actually shift the dial in terms of those health risks. Also around sort of accountability, we've kind of touched on this earlier in terms of if it's not managed, it's not measured. So if it's not measured, it's not managed. So having those conversations at board level, having individuals that are responsible for tracking these markers and also reporting it and having it as an open conversation across the organization is really, really key. Almost treating your employees as your partners in terms of actually improving the health of the organization is proving to be really, really key, and something that we propose as a way forwards for us. Again, musculoskeletal health. This is actually an interesting one, because I think this is kind of both. It has to, in terms of the application, it applies to us as individuals, but also to us as at an organizational level from a top-down perspective. So are there organizations out there that are already implementing this? Again, I'd be really, really interested to find out if anyone has seen this or has any other sort of similar examples to share. But scheduling that time in for individuals to actually manage their musculoskeletal health, to get away from the screen, is really, really important. So again, from the top-down approach, we can schedule this time in, we can ensure that employees are adhering to it, but at the same time, we all have a responsibility to do this as well. And this ranges from the very senior management all the way down to sort of your junior employees. Getting that time in to actually move from the screen is really, really important, and break that cycle which prevents the buildup of chronic musculoskeletal issues. relating to that and moving on is with regards to physical health. Ultimately, we all need to move. We all know that we need to exercise, but it's building that time in. And if I can share one reflection in terms of, I'm sure a lot of you can relate to, is that working from home has been a great leveler in terms of we've all struggled and we've all flourished in certain ways in terms of how we're managing our work-life balance. But ultimately, there is a really good discussion, and I'm interested to have this as we progress forward today, is around, I suppose, senior leadership expectations of working from home and what that looks like, because we've all tried it. We've all now had lots of experience of doing it. So I wonder if there are lots of principles and there are lots of ways that are unique to be it the individual, groups, or the organization as a whole that we can start to implement. And I think what's true is that we're not going to go back to what was previously described as our normal, but we're going to move forwards to what a new normal is. And I don't think that anyone will have cracked it yet, but it's certainly something that we need to work towards in terms of what are the healthy hybrid behaviors that allow us to ultimately gain the best from the opportunities we have to improve our physical health, but at the same time, be productive, be present with our work as well. Again, around sort of mental health, which is a key area for us, is around this sort of right to disconnect, which is a very interesting conversation. Again, I related to it earlier on in terms of because what's fantastic about technology is that our work is readily there and easily accessible at our fingertips. We can work from anywhere. On the flip side, our work is there, it's readily accessible, we can work from anywhere, and our time of days in which we're working can change as well. Now, we can manage that for the better in terms of if you're an early bird, yeah, you can get your work done in early in the morning, or if other commitments sort of get in the way, then you can work at different times, which is fantastic. But around sort of this ability to be so easily connected is fantastic. But we also do have a right, whenever we have annual leave, time away from work, it's really important to recharge. And I know Tiina and Tim will talk about this in terms of the Firstbeat data coming up, but that ability to step away, that right to disconnect is really key. And it's probably more, we need to think more around sort of just saying it, introducing this into policies and procedures and making it a norm for businesses is a really key step for us going forwards. And lastly, in terms of sustainability and inclusivity, which is another one of our chapter headings, I suppose really it comes down to one of the key things here is around sort of productivity. So again, rather than hours worked, is hours worked the sort of the right outcome measure for us to be measuring, rather than the actual, what is the productivity, what is the specific outcome of that specific role. So it is a challenge for us in terms of actually looking at the specific nature of different types of roles. In addition to that, how different people work as well, which is a really key thing. So looking at outcome goals that are potentially a little bit different to where we currently are, but actually challenging ourselves to see what are the things that we need to be tracking. And then that ultimately sort of closes this expectation gap with regards to how employees need to be productive on a day-to-day basis, and also feeling that they are being productive in the organization, recognizing and rewarding that as well. And I think a key thing here is around publishing. I think even if I refer back to my days as a physiotherapist, and I'm sure we can all relate to it, is accountability is a good thing. So if I say that I'm going to do my exercises to the physiotherapist, or alternatively, if I say to my friend, I'm going to run that 5-kilometer race, sharing that externally is a really key thing, because then it puts the onus on you and it actually creates that circle of accountability. And it takes a lot of confidence and a lot of, I suppose, guts to be able to do that. But publishing this data, sharing it with your organization, sharing it on a quarterly basis, which I know that's something that Vitality have started to introduce on a quarterly basis. It's fantastic, because again, you as an employee are a partner in the health and well-being journey of your organization. That's just been a little bit of an overview of the findings. I'll now pass it back across to Tiina. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Really great data. And some of the things that I'm going to be sharing really striking was that 48% of people who felt like they had no support had not yet had any support in these issues. So clearly the issues are very many-sided, and there's a lot of things to consider, and a lot of people didn't have experience with that, but we definitely have our work cut out for us ahead of time. Let's move on to the couple of findings what I have found from the Firstbeat database. So I do think most of you know Firstbeat. We had quite a few new people online, so if you want to learn more about who we are and what we do, visit our website. But basically, we are based here in central Finland, where I'm sitting right now, and we are sort of a pioneer in heart rate variability analytics. We have been measuring people's heartbeats for over 20 years, for hundreds of thousands of people, and then our analytics are found in about 50 million consumer devices that people are using. But in addition to that, we are a leading provider of so-called pro-grade physiological data and analytics, both in corporate wellness and in sports. Today, we work in about 70 countries around the world and have 80 employees in different countries. And sort of the key of what we do is seen in this slide. So the Firstbeat measurement, what it is, it uses a reliable, accurate device that gathers every beat of your heart. And from that, we can analyze heart rate variability. And from that, we then actually visualize stress and recovery and exercise. The balance between stress and recovery is the core of what we do to try to help people understand how to find a better balance between those things. And then exercise, of course, an important part of lifestyle. And because of these kind of measurements, we really have got some very interesting insights from the larger database that I'll now share. On the right-hand side here, you can see an example from our Firstbeat Live product. This is the app that people will have, and it just kind of quickly runs through some of the types of findings that people will get when they do a measurement with this device 24/7 at work, during leisure time, during sleep. They get insights about their stress and recovery balance and exercise, and sort of an overall score with a bunch of information also about what to improve and what they could do about that. But now let's take a look at the database that I mentioned before. So because we have accumulated a lots of this kind of data, we decided to do our data analysts did a comparison between 2017 to 2019, sort of the average values compared to 2020, 2021, and to see what changed during the pandemic year, or if anything changed. The cheat here a little bit, I had the numbers of measurement. We have about 37,000 working age adults during the pandemic years, and 156,000 people did measurements in 2017 to 2019. Here is one of the interesting findings, that sleep duration seemed to increase. When the pandemic started right around here, you can see that the duration of sleep increased. And this is clear also in other countries. People had more time to sleep because they were saving time from their daily commute, for example. Also, there was no hobbies and other things like that. So we simply had time to sleep a bit more. And obviously, that was a good finding. And it's interesting to see how many of us can actually stick with that as life starts to return to the new normal that Andrew sort of referred to. Also, the proportion of recovery, one of the metrics that we measure, whether your body is in a stress state or in a recovery state. So we clearly can see that the amount of recovery after the beginning of the pandemic seems to be increasing. Until then, there's always been sort of a trend across the year. This is mainly a Finnish database, although there is also a significant portion of the measurements are, for example, from the UK and the Scandinavian countries. There seems to be always a bit less recovery right before the summer holidays and right at the end of the year, and a boost in recovery at the beginning of the year. But after the pandemic, the amount of recovery overall increased, and it stayed higher throughout the pandemic, partially because we were sleeping longer time, partially because we were not going anywhere, we're just in our houses. But of course, it's a positive finding as well. But on the flip side, when we asked about self-reported stress, that also sort of alternates across the previous 2 years. As the pandemic started, it's interesting to see that for a little while, the subjective stress actually went down. And maybe it was some kind of a survival mechanism that people, they had to focus just to manage the situation. And it was kind of, we pulled all the resources that we had to deal with that. But then as the pandemic kept going and new lockdowns came in and it wasn't going away, a very noticeable increase in self-reported stress. And this is obviously one of the main things that we all have to address now. People aren't feeling great because there is so many things to consider, and hybrid working in principle is a great thing, but the practicalities need to be worked out for it to work. And then maybe the most striking finding, and Andy's data also showed the same thing. He showed some percentages of, I think he said 28% decrease in amount of physical activity. And this is actually based on measured data. So when we look across the whole database, people in all different fitness categories, from the most top level athletes to the regular people who don't maybe do hardly any exercise, clearly about a threefold increase in the number of very inactive days, meaning those days where there is less than 1,000 steps all day and all night. And that means that people weren't leaving the house, they were only just moving a little bit between the rooms. This is very impossible to do if you are going to the office and back. It's really easy to accumulate 1,000 steps, but if you're not going anywhere, it doesn't happen automatically. And most concerningly, this looks at the most inactive portion of the people. So people who in general are very inactive. With them, the number of inactive days increased up to about 35, 40, almost 45% of their days were those under 1,000 step days. And this is obviously going to start causing a lot of sort of musculoskeletal and other kinds of problems if we cannot reverse this trend, if people don't start finding ways to also fit that activity into their hybrid or their remote work days. And before we turn into the round table, just an example. This is a 24-hour data set from myself a couple of months ago or sometime this fall. And the red color here means some kind of stress, the green means recovery, blue means exercise. And just as an example of the kind of things I personally have sort of had to adjust to and learn during this time. I also, even if I'm an active person, discovered very early that it's super easy to get through the workday and realize that there wasn't hardly any physical activity at all because you weren't walking or biking or going anywhere. This is an example of a good day where I managed to integrate some good activities here. I actually started working at home about half an hour. Then I rode my bike to the office. I'm lucky enough to live close by that I can do that, about 15 minutes. That's what the blue color here means. Then kind of a busy day with presentations and meetings, different kind of events. Then I rode my bike home here around 4 o'clock and had another meeting from home going between 5 and 6. I do quite a bit of time zone work, and unless I sometimes broke up my day and actually built in a little bit of exercise into the day, I would end up being in the office really late. But this way, it was really easy for me to finish my work day at home and then be all done with it by 6 o'clock when the meeting ended. Another thing that I've really found myself and have discussed with a lot of people is if you're going to be working from home, taking that lunchtime walk, it's a completely normal and acceptable thing to do just to get some steps and some fresh air, and whether it's around the block or going around the park, whatever you can do in the setting where you live. But unless you do that, then suddenly you end up with those days with hardly any steps at all. And at that, I think I'll actually turn it on to the group here. If you guys can come on camera, and I'll welcome also Tim and Steve in. And having shared my own data, after you introduce yourselves, I'm going to ask you guys, what were your sort of key findings or key coping mechanisms personally, how you were dealing with these kinds of issues. But before that, why don't, Steve, can you just quickly introduce yourself so that everybody knows who we are talking with here?
Yes, hi everybody. So my name is Steve Moore. I work for a firm called Hymans Robertson in the UK. We are a pensions, investment and employee benefits consultancy firm. So I am head of HR there. And one of my big passions and places where I spend a lot of time is on well-being, unsurprisingly. So here to kind of share the experiences of Hymans Robertson, so what's happened in an actual UK-based employer. So happy to do that. Just in terms of my own personal coping mechanisms through the last 18 months, and certainly the first part of it, definitely keeping fit. So I've always been somebody who enjoys physical fitness, running, spin classes, that kind of thing. So maintaining that was really important. And, I do wear one of the sort of the fitness tracker watches, and I found that invaluable, as I'm sure lots of people did, because it really did focus you on that 10,000 steps. And look at the watch if I was working, and if I hadn't done them, then I would go out and I'd go and do a couple of miles around the block and just make sure I hit those targets. So that was really important for me. So that, I think, plus also just trying to maintain boundaries. It was really, really difficult to try and sort of switch off and have family time when you could literally be online all of the time. So being really, focused on boundaries was a big coping mechanism for me too. Great, thank you. And Tim, welcome.
Hi, how you doing? Hi to everyone around the world. Good to catch up. My role here at Firstbeat. So I'm part of the Firstbeat team. I'm based down in near Sandwich in Kent, actually, down on the southeast. and I'm responsible for sort of UK and also international partnerships. So yeah, probably my personal one's been quite interesting actually. I've found, because I was commuting up to London quite a bit, my whole world was changed upside down, some for the better, some for the worst. For the better would be, obviously, I don't need to commute as much because a lot of our conversations are done through Teams, etc. So, but on the flip side, I used to enjoy that commute time to reflect and to have some time to myself. I've got a young family, so the blurring of lines between family and work have been quite a challenge. And I guess that's also been representation from my Firstbeat life data, which has shown a drop off the hill of physical activity, just like you pointed out, Tiina. The fact, if you're commuting, you're walking a lot in London. When you're at home, you're probably walking to the fridge. So yeah, I naturally gained some weight. My VO2 and my fitness dropped off a hill, but I probably didn't have as much time for recovery. So my overall health probably worsened a bit, but actually time with my family increased. So I was able to do the school run, able to be there for breakfast and dinner. So there was some really big positives, but also some big negatives as well.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Okay, let's start with a couple of questions that were sent ahead of time, and I'll just start with something sort of overall. Like, what kind of things do you hear from companies? We heard what Andy shared from Vitality Report, but maybe I'll throw this on to Steve and Tim. That what in general, what do you hear from companies? What's working right now, and what are the areas that really need to be improved? What are the needs of the staff in this area? Let's start with you, Steve.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, it very much depends on the sector that you're in, and I'm in professional services, and I think kind of listening to my counterparts in other organisations, definitely what I picked up is a very much an increase in the level of trust and flexibility that people have given towards businesses, and I think that's worked really well. I think leaders have listened more in the last 20 months, probably out of necessity because there's been no blueprint for it. I think a much more deliberate focus on people management and well-being than perhaps we've seen in the past. We were forced almost to switch a video camera on, rather than wander up to a desk, particularly in the first year. So I think that very deliberate act of management has helped. And I think also all being in the same boat's helped because we've all been under this physical, threat from a virus. So our physical well-being has been very important for us and for our families. But the mental fallout from that as well, as time went on, I think, we definitely felt more of a mental pull on that. Some of the stats that you were showing there, Tiina, play out as well. So I think they're definitely the things that I pick up from a professional services perspective that seem to be working really well, or have been working really well.
Yeah, probably the only thing for me to chip in is because I talk to a lot of people from different businesses, so getting an understanding of how do you build culture at a working from home workforce it can be a challenge. There's the cultural implications of how do you build culture. Most businesses are built on people, so that's obviously been a massive challenge. Maybe Steve might add a bit more because I'm not from a HR background, but I do know that the challenges on culture building can be quite significant as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you really do notice different cultures. Just I do a lot of lectures, online lectures to companies, and some companies it's assumed that when the lecture starts, even if I'm talking and they're listening, everyone is on camera, and it seems to be a really sort of active and integrative community, whereas others are always completely anonymous. They are not showing their camera, and there's very few questions. And I do think that reflects a little bit of the attitudes, what's within the company, that if you're forced to turn your camera on, it does become a lot more personal, doesn't it? Anything to add to that, Andy? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Tiina, I was just kind of reflecting on sort of what Steve and Tim and yourself have said, and I suppose in our position in terms of our own team, we are responsible for, I suppose, bringing that health and well-being advice to organisations. So at First Point, chatting with those individuals such as Steve, who are responsible for the strategy, helping them make the right decision, and then in the delivery of it, and we've really had to challenge ourselves in terms of how we deliver. On one side, delivering and helping individuals to understand health and well-being advice has actually been great because everyone's at home, so they're a little bit more able to engage. So for example, if we do a posture workshop, everyone's able to turn their camera off and have a stretch and have a move around, which you probably wouldn't do, which has been fantastic. But I would certainly concur in terms of the challenges that we do see between organization to organization in terms of the level of engagement and interaction that you do see in a virtual sense is it does differ. And certainly, whilst it's a fantastic thing to be able to see into someone else's home because it gets you closer to them, at the same time I can also see that it's also a bit of a challenge in terms of how much you want to give away as an employee, and therefore engage with that sort of organizational behavior as well, which if you're in an office environment, you just pick it up in the air, don't you? Whereas that is a key challenge now, is to get, how do you get that and translate that in a remote sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there was a comment by somebody, sort of a comment/question, that it should be easier for the employee in a hybrid environment, right? Flexibility, no travel time, all those kind of benefits that we immediately think of. But we should really list some of the pluses and challenges, or pluses and minuses, so that both the employee and the company can benefit from that. And we've certainly already covered some of that, but I think it'd be really good to touch upon a few of them, like, what are the key areas, what is positive? Like Tim mentioned, one of the positives, more time with the family, for example, but there are some key challenges that maybe in the acute pandemic, we just sort of coped to survive with that, but now we have to get beyond surviving, and we have to get to the thriving phase where it can be sustainable. And for example, we don't get those musculoskeletal issues. So what kinds of things are you thinking in this area of what are the key issues we need to look at?
Well, I'm happy to start. Tiina, I think, obviously, as you say, massive advantages for employees. I mean, flexibility of your hours. We ran a number of surveys in the last 18 months, I think 3 or 4 in total, specifically around, how people were feeling as a result of the pandemic, and the top things that they said to us in terms of what they liked about working from home was no commute. Unsurprisingly, that came out top by quite some way. But also interestingly, what actually came out second top for us was just that ability to have a healthier lifestyle. So being able to exercise, being able to eat more healthy at lunchtime, and just have a better sense of well-being. And I probably didn't expect that to quite as high as it did in that particular survey that we did, but definitely big advantages there. And I think just one of the things that one of the words that was used in the vitality report, Andy, which I really like, was this difference between shallow work and deep work, and just this idea that in working at home, you can really get into that deep work without the distraction. Or possibly even the shallow work, if you've just got a bunch of emails to do, you don't need to be in the office for that. Some massive advantages there, but I think kind of balance that off, there's certainly disadvantages as well, because it almost assumes that if there's a choice about whether you come into the office or not, there's almost a sort of a presumption there that the employee makes a perfect decision, and we've got to see how that plays out, because employees might not make perfect decisions about when to be in and when not to be in, and that could result in the exhaustion of the social capital that we've built out. It could result in risk of burnout. It could risk in the erosion of the culture of the organization that we've already touched upon. So these are all things we've just got to really keep our eyes on going forward. We don't know how they're going to turn out. It is a bit of an experiment for us all, really, but certainly some of the disadvantages for me.
Yeah, and following on from you quickly, is that I find it difficult in terms of, I'm a people person, so I'm in a sales and partnership role. So yes, we have learned how to do sales and how to do partnerships online, and surprisingly much better than I potentially thought it would be. However, I miss that people contact. There's nothing better than a coffee and a spark and a relationship that's developed in person than is different to online. Plus, also working from home perpetually can feel a bit like the Truman Show. So each day blurs into the weekend, which blurs into the working week. So, you have to be much more self-disciplined. So that's something that I've certainly found, that having to build breaks in and find that time for exercise, find that time for mindfulness, find that time for rest breaks is incredibly important. Otherwise, it becomes quite fatiguing. And I know we're going to be talking a bit about burnout and bore out, is that it can lead to that. Yeah, very much so.
Absolutely, Tim. Just what's coming to mind and is really, and so Steve, you said, touched on as well, is that social capital. I think one of the things that, again, I agree with all of the points that have been raised before, but I think one of the key points that we'll definitely have to be very cognizant of is going forwards is, as say, for example, potentially more senior individuals within an organization is almost given that right to younger or junior or new members of staff, that they can switch off. They don't have to be on Teams or Slack, whatever it might be, 24/7. It's almost trying to introduce a whole new way of working. And then the choice of coming into the office, I think it poses a really interesting sort of topic around what is it that we're going to achieve today, and therefore what's the best environment. And almost we're coming into a performance context, which I know from a Firstbeat perspective is fantastic in terms of actually based upon how I react, how I manage my stress, how I work best, how can I create an ideal environment, and can we have those types of conversations within teams? I think that's a huge opportunity that exists for us now, and we're quite really excited to see where we go with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of the hybrid working idea has to acknowledge that likely there are individuals who are going to be working better from the office. Not every home is set up to be an office. You have to have some kind of space, and you have to get an allowance to get that right kind of chair and desk and all the equipment to maintain proper ergonomics. And for certain individuals, the best option is to be able to close the door behind you and go to the office. So I certainly hope that those options will remain for people as well. And there will be that sort of finding the right model for each individual, and not just that everyone will declare that they want to remote work on Fridays to start the weekend earlier, but it really needs to be a more comprehensive look, I think. Great, man, time is running really fast. There's a couple of, Dom, is there anything in the Q&A that you would like to raise at this point? And then I have a couple more quick questions here that maybe I'll bring if there's nothing there.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much a question, but there is a point, obviously, and it's a wider issue, which is whether hybrid working is kind of going to be the new workplace discrimination, and that's a wider point. But that's all there is in the Q&A at the moment. But I'll leave that one with you, Tiina.
Yeah, I mean, that's good, because we also had actually 2 questions about this beforehand. So I did want to, we should comment on that a little bit, that is hybrid working the new workplace discrimination? Those that can do it benefit from all that it can offer, whereas those who can't are sort of left behind in the old. So what kind of thoughts does that raise in you guys? Let's start with you, Andy, this time.
I think there's definitely the potential for that, Tiina, but again, I suppose this is something just reflecting on the report. We very much want to focus on the opportunities that lie ahead versus the potential issues. And we just need to be aware of that as a potential risk. And that's where sort of relating to the recommendations falling off the back of the report with regards to inclusivity. Let's have these conversations. Let's build it into policies. Let's ensure that we are not and dare I say, consciously or more often than not, maybe unconsciously or subconsciously, actually allowing these gaps to sort of create to appear. And this is where sort of obviously like publishing of data, there's a lot of obviously companies have to sort of share their sort of pay stats and pay gap stats in terms of sexes as well. Why not have this as something as well? And then it comes down to, I suppose, probably like a last comment as well in terms of what's the definition of productivity? What's the definition of positive outcomes and working well for your group, for your organization, for your team, whatever it might be? It's sort of almost having a real clear idea on the KPIs that are expected of you, the expectations around how you achieve that, and therefore the policies and procedures that fall into that. Again, I'll sort of go over to Steve from a policy perspective, because that's definitely not my area of expertise, but certainly I think I'm thinking around the practical elements of it. It's probably around sort of having those cultures and open conversations and transparency.
I think it's exactly that. And yeah, I mean, I think we've got to accept that hybrid working, just in the same way as the more traditional flexible working, is not going to be possible for everybody in every industry. I mean, typically, people like hospital porters or surgeons or, police officers will not be able to work at home. But I think you can challenge that, because it might not be possible all of the time for everybody to work from home. But there may be ways that you can construct roles so that it is possible to work at home for some of the time. So, if you have professional learning to do, or if you have admin tasks to do, is that something that allows you to work in some shape or form in a hybrid world? So I think, I mean, even that though, technology is the enabler for that, isn't it? Because, you know, even to operate in that sense, you have to have the connectivity, the technology to be able to do that. So I think, you know, technology is the enabler. I think, you know, there's massive advances in technology and data science that will provide different ways of doing things, different ways to connect into the business. So, you know, kind of, I hope that in time, sort of technology allows that to be wider. I think to address the specific point, I mean, does it, you know, is it the new workplace discrimination? I'm not sure. I'd sort of say that it is. I'd find it hard from an HR perspective to say it would be a cause of direct discrimination. But I think if employers are intransigent in their approach, or if they're inflexible in their approach to how they apply these policies, then, you know, you could very easily make the case around indirect discrimination.
Yeah, Tim, any thoughts to add to that?
Not really. It's not my not my area, so I'd probably just leave it with what Steve was saying.
Yeah, tough question, and clearly I totally agree with that. That not every job can be done. And even those jobs that can be done, unless we provide the right kind of support, not everybody is going to have the same ability to do really effective, good remote work and take care of themselves. But
actually, probably the only thing to add is what you flagged, Andy, about MSK as ergonomics. Just making sure that employers adopt the same ergonomic principles to the workplaces at home, because I've seen so many terrible ergonomic workplace setups, including chairs and tables and etc., where it's not consistent with the level of ergonomics that are in a workplace. And I'm not surprised that MSK injuries are going through the roof. More prolonged sitting, poor postures, poor ergonomics, and maybe getting a lack of fitness, as we highlighted in the Firstbeat data, is not a nice place in terms of injuries moving forward.
yeah, absolutely. I just saw that there was some comment about there was a lot going on in the chat instead of the Q&A box, and we haven't had a chance to actually moderate that, but hopefully you've had a chance to read that. And I think since we are just about out of time, what we'll probably end up doing is we'll do a blog on this topic. So we'll sort of continue with some of the questions and topics that you guys have raised in the chat and in the Q&A, because they're really important topics there as well. And we'll sort of expand on that in the blog over the next couple of weeks. But let's, even if we are 1 minute over time, let's just touch upon real quickly on this. What have you found out about bore out and burnout? There were several questions about that, and it also was mentioned here a few minutes ago. Bore out kind of meaning that because you are stuck at home or you're working from home, you don't have that social interaction, that in a way, even if you have a lot of demands, you might get bored to the monotony of that. And the physiological response in the end can be just as devastating as burnout can be. What do we know about that? What have you heard about the incidence of burnout and burnout cases?
Well, I mean, I'm happy to start again. I think in terms of burnout, you know, definitely a lot out there. We've seen in our business people that have suffered from that. Interesting, there's some stats just in the last few days which showed in the 3 months before the pandemic started, anxiety was our 8th highest reason for absence. But then in the sort of the 3 months, 2020 to June, it kind of went up to 4th. But then interestingly, from June to September, it went up to 2nd. So it was almost like a delayed reaction where that anxiety kind of sort of rose up the rankings, as it were, as time went on. And that maybe links to one of the points I think you made, Tiina, about almost that protect yourself in the first instance, and then it almost kind of happens a bit later down the line. So definitely burnout. And we put in some, we placed a webinar actually a couple of months ago in our organization, which our EAP, our employee assistance provider, ran for us, and there was almost 20% of the organization dialed into that event live. And pre-pandemic, we would have got nowhere near that number of people interested in what an EAP provider had to say. So definite interest there. Definitely people want to learn about more about how to protect themselves around that side of things. So definitely see a lot in the burnout. I'll be honest, I've not really sort of seen too much from a bore out perspective. I think in our business we've been super busy. We've not seen any drop off in productivity, and not really got that sense personally in our business around that sense of bore out.
I would concur with that, Steve. I think certainly from a burnout perspective, we've certainly, we're like any other organization, very innovative, fast moving, and so there are certainly at times, but like being on a sports team, there are times in different groups and different times of the year based upon your department that we have to be very, very acutely aware of the stresses that are based upon those teams or individuals. So we've been really eager to ensure that we support those individuals, appreciating that not everybody's in the same boat at the same time and needs exactly the same solution. So I think the range of tools on offer, certainly we at Vitality have sort of offered a lot more and been able to do that. And subsequently, Steve, I would totally concur with your observation there. Engagement with in terms of both what we deliver internally as well as externally to our members, the average level of engagement with a health and wellbeing webinar around sort of, say, for example, be it anything from goal setting to healthy eating to managing posture to stress management, our overall engagement levels have been much, much higher, which is fantastic, both in a live perspective as well as sort of watching afterwards, which is fantastic. So it's great to get out there. It's great to support our employees in that regard. And similarly, the bore out, yeah, I'm not one that I've really heard of too much, but again, certainly we've been quite busy. So it's more sort of on the burnout element that we've been trying to proactively manage.
And not much more to me to add. Probably bore out for me because it's just been at home consistently, very similar place. Obviously, kids running in, the whole box and dice in terms of that. So that like the Truman Show, but having looked at my data and then realizing that I need to be more disciplined about my own health has helped that. So being more disciplined about mini breaks, because sometimes it could be morning Australia calls right through to Brazil to the United States. So you've got to be careful. It's not suddenly such a long working day that you become burnt out. So I think there's a degree of personal discipline that you need to have. Obviously, your company's provide that. We have to do it ourselves a bit as well. Obviously, Firstbeat provide it for us, but we have to be a bit more. When you're so remote, you have to be a little bit more personally disciplined. But yeah, I mean, it's led to some health issues for me. In terms of one thing, drinking way too many coffees. So I ended up seeing a specialist, and that was the result. Is that I was going coffee after coffee after coffee. And that it was also being picked up in my Firstbeat data as well. So since I've changed that, I don't feel like I'm heading towards burnout, and I feel much better from a physiological and mental health point of view.
Great. Really huge thanks to all of you for the discussion. And we ran 5 minutes over time, so I do think we have to stop right now. We'll continue the discussion via some form of blog in the coming weeks, especially what's going on in the chat. If you want to get in touch with any of the people on the discussion here, you can find Andrew and Steve and Tim and myself on LinkedIn and contact us via there. If you're interested in the Firstbeat data, Firstbeat live data, maybe for your company, so just get in touch with us here as Firstbeat, and we are happy to tell you more about that. Thanks for all the participants from around the world and those who are listening to this later on, and great discussion, you guys. And let's continue next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.